Good morning to everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. In brief, I'm an engineer by training. I own two businesses, Rubium Innovations, which focuses on software development, and Rubium Consultants, which does consulting services in SADC region. On the consulting side, my personal experience, because that's where I spend a lot of my time, at this stage, we build digital businesses, literally transforming any organization to be a digital organization. Before that, we were building telecommunications businesses. Anybody that has got a license and would prefer to have an operating business, which we used to call from license to cash in the bank. So we built quite a lot of telecommunications organizations in SADC region, Swaziland, Malawi, Tanzania, Zim, South Africa, and the like. Before that, we were doing strategy consultants, and that's pretty much where I spent the rest of my life preoccupied. In the process, we also discovered that as a region or as a continent, we import quite a lot of software from Europe, US, or China, and sometimes pay a huge amount of money unnecessarily so. And that's what prompted us to start a software development business, which is doing very well in the region. It's important that I highlight what actually motivated me to start consultings. My view as I worked for companies like Motorola before starting my own company, I noticed the extent to which Africa had a big gap in terms of determining our own future and destination. And my vision was, if the cream of Africa in terms of skills, experience, professionalisms in different disciplines would team up and form some business of some sort to do the front end strategic planning, to do the front end design, to do business cases, perhaps Africa could save a lot of money, which I realized was being shipped out of the continent. And that's what really inspired me to start Rubium. And my vision then was I would have the best two guys from Malawi, from Zambia, from Zim, from Tanzania, and together we can kind of drive the destination for Africa. And I still have that passion, I still have that vision, and I'm still hoping that by some day in my lifetime, there will be this consulting organization which really takes care of the business aspects of Africa. I operate off Zim, South Africa, Namibia largely, in terms of business operations. Thank you. I sincerely believe that the vision to become a middle-income country by 2030 is achievable and doable. And perhaps we have the capacity, the energy, and the drive as a country to achieve that. But a few pointers here. The first one is that the context within which, or the parameters that would use to measure a digital, a middle-income economy, if you compare yesterday to 2030, are differing significantly. The fourth industrial revolution is disrupted the context within which economies would play. Just perhaps four areas to unpack in terms of what digital transformation would do to such. The first one is that If you look at the development life cycles from agricultural revolution to industrial revolution, then there was information revolution, the dot-coms, it always assumed a very serial approach, which was led perhaps by the developed economies. But what digital transformation has done is disrupt those cycles to the extent that you could always start anywhere, and the development processes or cycles are no longer a serial approach, but perhaps more what some people would call agile and scrum approaches. And so what digital transformation does is provides us an opportunity to leapfrog certain development life cycles. We don't have to follow through the same cycles that the rest of the world followed. As an example, the developments in EcoCash or mobile money in particular in Zim is a big opportunity that would have allowed us to leapfrog development in the financial service sector and put Zim at the front end of financial inclusivity. I recall at some stage last year when there were massive disruptions in financial services because of mobile money. Our reaction was to stop it and use regulation to bring them back to book. But perhaps what we should have done is put the best minds in finance, the best minds in technology, the best minds in law in a room for a month and then give them a task to come up with a mobile payment platform or regulations and laws that would protect our financial services, but at the same time position Zim at the best in the world where everybody could come and learn from us. The second thing around digital transformation in terms of Zim being a middle income economy by 2030 is around the two sectors that drive our economy, which is agriculture and mining. I think these are fairly capital intensive sectors. They also require a massive amount of infrastructure in order for us to develop. And in the past, I've actually written a few articles around how Zim can move from being what we used to call the breadbasket of Africa to become the innovation basket of Africa, or from highest literacy rate to highest innovation rate. The point is, to what extent can Zim position itself using digital transformation to become the hub of agriculture innovation in Africa? That is slightly different from producing more maize, from producing more tobacco, but really controlling the information and innovation cycle in agriculture in the continent. How can we capacitate the several agriculture institutes that we have in the region? How can we become the hub of mining innovation in the region? Becomes the key. And this is where digital transformation becomes important. If you look at maize production, we are just below 1 ton per hectare, when in fact the global average is around 10 tons per hectare. So how can we use digital transformation to improve productivity of maize? Even in tobacco, the current increase in productivity is driven by more acreage. We're cutting more trees to have more areas to plant. It's not as a result of innovation. So digital transformation would allow us to leapfrog the development cycles within these two sectors so that we can position our country at the front end. The third area could be employment. I think one of the most quoted statistics in the country is unemployment rate. And this is always measured around how many people are formally employed and how many people are not formally employed. But what we have seen from Uber, from Amazon, from many other digital platforms that are emerging, the definition of employment itself has changed. Who is an employer, who is employed, is fundamentally being disrupted. because if I operate a platform business, I become an employer, I become a business person, and so forth and so forth. So what digital transformation does, it helps us to expand the scope within which jobs can be created in the first place, but more importantly, to change the fundamentals on which or the definitions that we generally apply to who is an employer, who has been employed or not. So as a country, given where we are at, I think by shifting the way we look at things, we could embrace digital transformation significantly to leapfrog development cycles and achieve Vision 2030. One of the things that I would do if I was in charge is perhaps to change from having a Minister of ICT and I would have a Minister of Innovation or a Minister of Digital Transformation just to accelerate that process. Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to work as an international vendor myself when I was working for Motorola for several years, and I've also had the opportunity to work for a mobile operator. So I understand both sides of the coin to a large extent. And in our consulting services, particularly in telecom sector, we believe we have saved the industry perhaps more than 600 million US dollars in terms of money that would have been overspent on infrastructure, systems, technology, and the like. Now, just put things in context, particularly for Zim. The situation we have now is, number one, we don't have adequate competitive bidding in infrastructure. This has largely been driven by the sanctions because now the European infrastructure vendors have pulled out of Zim, and so also Americans have pulled out. So what you are left with generally is Chinese on the equipment side, and perhaps Indians largely on the IT side. And that limitation of vendors then removes competitive bidding, which is the bedrock on which pricing for telecoms infrastructure is generally built. The second thing that we find within that context for Zim is that a lot of the infrastructure for the private telecoms operators, yes, they could have some funding, but for state-owned enterprises, the Chinese vendors also come with funding. That then complicates the process, because then if someone brings equipment and they brings funding, you are a little bit compromised in the first place in terms of your negotiation skill and capability. And even then, the funding sometimes involves other stakeholders in terms of negotiations, which then makes it a little bit more difficult for the state-owned enterprises to play. So that is a very, very big factor in terms of pricing for telecoms infrastructure in Zim. Prior to 2000, if you look at 1996, when mobile telecom started, we had the likes of Nokia Siemens, we had Ericsson's, we had many other players participating in infrastructure tenders, and that has changed to date. The thing to appreciate around the cost of infrastructure in Zim is regulation. I think our regulatory environment is a little bit behind in a few aspects. The status of regulators in Africa also is a little bit behind, particularly in some countries as you go further north. So areas like infrastructure sharing are not properly regulated, and sometimes it's left up to the network operators to decide on their own. And the second problem we have there is that if you look at Zim, I think compared to other countries in the region, is the only country that does not have a national infrastructure company. which is either owned by the state or owned by private players. And that is like a wholesaler for backbone infrastructure, like your fiber or your towers, which therefore significantly reduces cost. So when the infrastructure vendors come to provide a turnkey solution to any of the telecommunications operators, they would therefore include infrastructure, which in many countries is shared, and that naturally makes the pricing for the packages much higher than would have been the case in other countries. The case for sanctions in telecommunications in particular for Zim is quite clear. It's not a case for even speculation or debate. If today you issue an international tender for base station equipment or for switches for an operator in Zim, you likely not get a response from the big vendors from Europe and USA, and that's a fact. And the moment you are limited to a few operators or vendors from China, then that brings problems immediately. If today you issue a tender for IT systems for any of the big telecoms operators in Zim, you're also likely to be limited to a few big ones from Asia in particular, and that creates a problem. And the third thing that you find is the payment terms for Zim are always cash upfront, and many of these operators therefore try and fund infrastructure from internal cash flows, or sometimes in the past they would go get short-term loans from banks at very high cost to fund infrastructure, which is not the case in the business case model for telecommunications in many parts of the world is long-term funding from the business. But Zim finds itself in a very, very difficult situation to fund telecommunications because of sanctions. I know of other operators that actually had problems with getting roaming partners. So when you travel out of the country, you generally have a partner that is ready and available to accept you as a roaming partner. Vodafone for a long time would not accept some Zim companies to be roaming partners, and that creates a problem. The third thing to appreciate is that telecoms is a technology-driven business, and therefore economies of scale is fundamental. And therefore, when you are dealing with smaller vendors and smaller partners that don't drive economies of scale, you tend to find very, very expensive infrastructure, including even handsets. I think Zim is one of the markets with a huge gray, they call it a gray market for handsets, because devices are generally very, very expensive in Zim. If you compare with other countries, the devices also come as part and parcel of the network operator deals, because they've got contracts with big international partners or players, which reduces cost. So yes, for sure, sanctions have significantly affected the rate at which Zim development would play. As a last example, there is Zim at the moment is the only country in the sub-region that does not have an international or a pan-African mobile operator like the Vodacoms, the MTNs, the Airtels, and the like. And that has significantly affected the way telecommunications is run in Zim. Well, I think whether UN would have declared ICT as a basic human right, that's probably a little bit too late, because it has already declared itself. I always argue that the Maslow's hierarchy of needs would have water and all these things, security, food at the bottom of the triangle. But nowadays, in many cases, at the bottom of the triangle is Wi-Fi, and sometimes it's a battery for your phone. And what COVID has also done is accelerate that decision. But anyway, to your point, I think the difficulty that we have, particularly in Africa, for that declaration to happen is that the likes of water and health, which have been declared as a human right, can be delivered as fundamental infrastructure, kind of independently in their own way. The problem with ICT is dependent on a few other key infrastructures to be in place before. For an example, you'd need energy. In some cases, the deployment of ICT has been limited because of the unavailability of electricity in many places. The second problem we have with ICT being declared is perhaps the mindset of many of the leaders and regulators who believe that the provision of bread and butter infrastructure, such as food, such as roads, takes precedence over the provision of ICT and innovation in particular. It's probably an older mindset, because what you notice now is that you could easily accelerate the deployment of infrastructure or services in general. In fact, what the likes of Facebook and Uber have shown is that you do not need to own the underlying infrastructure in order to provide a service. You don't need a telecommunications license in order to do a WhatsApp call in Zim. You probably, EcoCash or mobile money proves that you don't need a Reserve Bank license to operate a bank and things like that. So the declaration of ICT as a human right is long overdue from an official perspective, but there is a mindset shift that needs to happen from the policymakers for that to be done. And the sooner it's done for a continent like Africa, the quicker we can catch up and even overtake the rest of the world. I like the conversation of 5G. I remember in 1996, I was probably the first person to sell what we used to call 2.5G network to Vodacom in South Africa. I was working for Motorola then. And we used to tell the rest of South Africa that the world will come to an end unless if you don't have 2.5G. And then when 3G came, we also told them that the world will come to an end quickly for you if you don't have that. So these discussions around 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, they remind me of a dance at a wedding. If you are dancing facing the in-laws, there's a dance you give. If you are facing the boys and girls, there's a kind of dance you give. And it's also, there's a different context to what 5G means. So 3 points to consider. The current internet penetration in general in Zim using SIM cards as a measure is around 60%. So we've got a good 40% that still don't have internet access. So from that context, you would argue that it's more important to cover the 40% than to start talking about 5G. The second thing on internet penetration is if you actually check the smartphone penetration is lower than 60%, perhaps 55, perhaps 50, depending on who you are talking to. So we've got a bigger proportion of the population still that don't have internet capable phones. And then you start arguing, okay, what is more important here, to talk about 5G or to ensure that my grandmother in Weza can have cheap and affordable internet? What really is the priority here? But on the flip side, we need to develop, we need to lead in terms of technology. So if we want to attract investors and other players to come in, we need to talk about 5G. We need to be front end of development. So, but if you ask me what really benefits Zim, what would take us to a middle income economy, is perhaps less the talk about 5G, but the availability of high quality and affordable internet to the rest of the population is what we should be talking about. So in all these deals that are coming through, even if 5G is spoken about, we need to ask, how does that make everybody access internet everywhere? It's almost like someone talking about Johnny Walker Platinum or Blue Label. But in the end, what you want to really find out is how much of the green or brown beer is available. And even basics. Services, you would have noticed, was it yesterday on Twitter, or yesterday but one, our Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Trade was advertising a Gmail as an access email, and that's quite sad. You see. We are in this space where we need to be using our own government email addresses for government business. So you begin to ask the question, what is more important, to talk about 5G or to talk about ensuring that all this infrastructure provides adequate and usable government services so that we can run our own email on our own servers? So the talk about 5G for me is neither here nor there. It's just a marketing gimmick. What matters is how much high quality and affordable data are we providing to our population. The beauty about telecommunications or technology in particular is that it's a little bit difficult to politicize or even to drag politics. Yes, there could be some tenders here and there for an ICT system which would have been given to this guy or that guy. But when you talk at a national level, either from telecommunications operators or big national projects, it's difficult to talk politics in terms of technology operations. And as a result, it's not true that you find a big vendor in USA or UK or Germany wanting to come to Zim and therefore they lose the bid. In fact, what would happen generally is that some of these vendors come and look for local partners. We don't have the capacity or skills to generate some of these systems in any event. And as a result, the names that you are giving there as getting the bids would still require international partners to deliver. So it's not quite true. I think the problem is not about business being given to big local politically connected players. That's not true at all. In fact, one of the problems in Zim is that technology in general is more than $1 billion US dollar revenue if you look at telecoms operators on their own. But if you ask yourself, what have we created as a local industry? Perhaps nothing, actually. I always argue that 99% of what you need to make a call is imported. We only provide the ground on which the towers is built. 99% of what you need to make a mobile money transaction is imported. Apart in the past when we were doing those kiosks. So we have not been able to create a local industry. If you look at South African Namibians, they had a policy that at least 35% of capital expenditure should be used to create a local industry, which we have not been able to do in Zim. We're just consuming technology without growing any business. I would actually challenge many of our industry champions and policymakers where their grandchildren are going to work. In around 2014, 2015, I approached the then Minister of ICT, and I said, look here, there is what is called the Universal Services Fund, which is, I think, some percentage levied on the revenue telecom operators to fund the development of infrastructure in areas which would perhaps be viable for these operators to expand into. So generally that money is then used to procure infrastructure, which is then put back. I said, if we really want to make a difference here, let's take part of that money and create an innovation fund. And so that gave birth to that innovation fund, which was launched by the former Minister of ICT. I wrote the paper. And my idea then was, look, if we have this fund, in every district of Zim, there is a post office. If we go to that post office and we put Wi-Fi, and then and using some available infrastructure, we can then perhaps move a step further, and every youth in the rural areas going to the post office, and which is nearby, and some districts have got more post offices, and then at least they'll be connected to the rest of the world. That way we innovate, we capacitate our youth to start writing applications to interconnect to the rest of the world. Of course, ideally you want them to work from within the comfort of their homes using more handsets. But in the event that it's not quite possible, then we've got these centers where they could go and get access. But then I think the idea, somehow we got these community centers, which then the former President Mugabe used to go and launch. But I think that lost the point, really. But the idea was to make sure that within a distance of 5 kilometers, a youth in Zim has got access to affordable, high-quality Wi-Fi. Innovation by nature cannot be regulated. What you need is to enable this youth to connect to other youth throughout the world. That is the first step. And where you can now facilitate capacitation programs, be they multinational or binational, whatever the case might be, or through other universities, you could then start doing that. It's a big departure from these innovation hubs, which are building, which focuses on building. So you can't restrict an innovation into a bricks and mortar. Innovation is in the brain and is in the digital space. So the best we need to do as a country moving forward is to ensure that our youth have got easy, cheap, and affordable, high-quality internet access, and to facilitate them to be connected to the global world. Number 3, for us to start consuming the solutions they develop and stop being fixated in importing every little application or every little system from India or China. We can do that, and perhaps we need to stop this idea of buying 10 key solutions from China or India, which is basically elbowing, leaving no space for our own local developers to get enough income. The ease of doing business needs to be unpacked a little bit. Let's start with just registering a company, getting your taxes done, and things like that. If I compare the different countries, South Africa, Namibia, I simply go online, I can select the company name that I want, I can then click submit, and within a while it can confirm whether the name is available or not. I can make my payment. So it's pretty easy and fast. If you look at Zim, whether it's now 5 days or 10 days or 20, I still do not understand why there's a middleman to do that process for me. There's always that person who is waiting by the street corner or the side just before you get into the building, who says they can do a name search for you, and they say they can, if you want to do tax clearance, they can get it sorted within a day or two. That creates a very, very big problem. And why at this stage we still cannot allow people to register a company, choose a name that I want, I can then submit, and the system says yes, make payment, then I can pay using even mobile money if I don't have a bank account. I still cannot understand that. You go to deeds office, it's a similar problem. You go to give some person a piece of paper and they go inside and they do a search for you, they give you a piece of paper. It's probably a little bit in the past. So the ease of doing business with regard to just getting the initial onboarding process is a little bit more difficult for Zim. But perhaps Zim is in the same bracket as countries like Malawi and to some extent Tanzania, where it's still a very manual process and front-loaded with middlemen that are not adding any value. If that could be resolved, and for me it's not even an issue of cost, it's just an issue of will by whoever the policymakers are to make it happen, that would make it much easier. And linked with those processes, obviously, integration to registry office. In many of these countries, you want to register for a company, apart from checking for whether that company is pre-registered or not. It will also check your ID number and even your face with Home Affairs. So the process is much quicker for somebody who is sitting in London or somewhere foreign country to just try it online. So would need to be fully registered, integrated to central registry for checking of IDs and things like that, without a person having to do it manually. That process, I've seen with a few financial institutions now. The registrar office is now providing an interface for you to do a check automatically, but things could be better. On the legal side, these so-called articles of association, I've seen it's just the same paper over and over, but you need some lawyer of some sort. But to answer your question, I think our ease of doing business still has a long way to go, not necessarily from a policy perspective, but from an implementation perspective. Look, I think without talking specifically to the Tier 1s and PowerTel, I just want to address the structure of telecoms at a high level. One of the things that we struggled with is the cost of incoming bandwidth, because we're buying upstream bandwidth from overseas, and because we're a landlocked country and there's a few other things that sort of determines sometimes the availability of internet throughout the country, which affects these companies that you mentioned. But more importantly, in terms of the structure of the industry, Zim is not quite a reflection of a good telecommunications industry that you'd find in many countries. The peculiarities are, firstly, we do not have a global or pan-African players that use the economies of scale and tend to normalize things. We are still very much Zimbabwe, with a few very small Zimbabwean companies operating. And that changes the fundamentals significantly. We don't have the likes of Airtel, Vodafone, and the like operating in Zim. And that is a problem. The second thing you find is that the state has got quite a bit of control now through the state-owned enterprises, which is fine. You find that in a few countries, the state would have a direct interest there. But it's the business model which is used, which is a big problem. In many of the countries, although the state has got an interest, but some of these entities are listed at the stock exchange. Some of them are also have private ownership, which normalizes quite a bit of the operating model or the business model. So because most of our entities are still owned 100% by the state, and still quite a little bit untransformed from the sense of an operating model, it creates a bit of a problem. If I had my own way, I would have some of them listed on the stock exchange. I would have allowed other private people to come and buy a stake and do a few other things. That really helps in terms of development. The third area that we probably need to look at is our regulatory environment in particular. We are one of the few countries in the region that do not have number portability, which allows customers to move from one network to the other whilst keeping your number. Some countries have gone to the extent of having virtual mobile network operators and the like. I think our regulatory environment could do a little bit more to catch up with the rest of the region so that we can enable these players to move faster. What we are seeing in the rest of the region is that the regulator role is shifted. Instead of primarily looking at creating a level playing field and perhaps protecting customers, regulators are actually creating an enabling environment for innovation and development of the sector. If you compare with Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, they now have a sandbag facility that allows innovators in financial service sectors to come and deploy their services without being restricted by regulation. That's the sort of thing that we need in ICT in order to move forward. Telemedicine has been very successful, particularly in India and Asia Pacific region. Very, very well adopted. In Africa, we tend to talk about it, but implementation has been very sporadic and sometimes opportunistic and a little bit poor. I get a sense that it's probably due to implementation and policy making, where in this particular case, medicine and technology operate as silos, and each with its own development agenda, is with its own funding, and is with its own drive. I can imagine hypothetically if health and ICT were put under the same minister. Perhaps the next day would have this service, for an example, where nowadays with WhatsApp, I can be sitting in a rural area somewhere, take a picture of my wound, I send it to the network operations center, and provide perhaps some basic health services, some basic consultants. Quite a lot of people end up spending a lot of money on health issues because they don't have the initial $20-30 to go for consultation fee, when in fact, if there was a facility to give them advice, like in the past we used to have a radio doctor. All you need now is a system that replaces the radio doctor with a telephone doctor. I think we could go a very, very long way. In Rubium Innovations, we actually developed a system that allows to do that. We also developed a system that literally replaces Mudumeni, exactly the same service. It gives you instructions on what you can do from the day you start plowing to the day you sell. But our policy environment need to develop a little bit more, and we need much more partners and an ecosystem to implement that. I think I've seen sometimes our temptation is to say, no, it's government that hasn't done this and that. And for sure, government need to do more. But with a lot of digitally driven services, you need a solid ecosystem to make it successful. Ecosystem of software developers, ecosystem of infrastructure suppliers, ecosystem of operations support and the like to make it happen. Otherwise, it becomes a big white elephant. So what we lack in smaller countries like ours is that big supportive ecosystem. Perhaps if such a service is launched jointly between 2 or 3 countries, you then have adequate economies of scale and a big ecosystem to make it a reality. Yes, true. I think if I use the word marketing gimmick, I may have created the wrong impression. 5G means Internet of Things. 5G means better bandwidth. 5G means speed. 5G means enabling the fourth industrial revolution. And now you can have more connected devices on the internet and all the good things that come with it. But perhaps that is not quite where our bigger problem is. It's not bigger bandwidth for a person in Murambinda or Weza who is just wanting to send a WhatsApp in a quicker way. I think some 60% or so of our traffic is still driven by WhatsApp because that's the cheaper thing. So it's the cost of data. And it's the availability of reliable data, which to me is much more important. Just to give you some interesting stats, it will probably cost a person 6 times cheaper to make a WhatsApp call than a normal voice call. And therefore, when a person doesn't WhatsApp, they're seriously disadvantaged. And so what we're saying is the progression from any G, from 4G, 5G, 6G will happen. And we have got big vendors and investors that are looking at that. And that is a natural progression. Our focus should be more on what fraction of our population can now send an email easily from wherever they are if they have a phone. Why should a bigger part of our population be on WhatsApp? The reason is because the data is expensive. I think there was a research done that we are probably the second most expensive country in the region in terms of data. So yes, they are parts of the sector that would require 5G. Many industries, manufacturing and agriculture may need it. But let's have 80% of the country geographical coverage having high quality 3G and 4G services. The other time I had meetings, Zoom meetings, and I was traveling from Harare to Mutare on the highway. And I thought, okay, so with the 3 mobile operators, I can switch SIM cards, buy a big data bundle, and I can continue with my Zoom meeting. It was impossible. You cannot have a continuous, good, high-quality Zoom meeting, no matter how much data you've got, continuously between Harare and Mutare, and I guess between Harare and Blawa is the same. And I'm talking here highway, which must be adequately covered. And so when you talk rural areas, different things. If you want to test this, check from banking services where inclusive banking is important. You find that the highest used service is USSD because it's cheap and it's available. A lot of the internet banking or mobile apps in banking are largely restricted to urban areas because people in the rural areas don't have data, and that is the problem. I think the cyber security bill is a very important development for the country. We need it. The rate at which cyber security issues are popping up left, right, and center entails that we require it. It provides consistency in the application of the law, interpretation of the law, and the like in many contexts, and particularly in a country where there's too much politics and things like that. So it's a very important development for us. But on the other side, the area that we need to simultaneously develop is the enforcement of that law. So in my home area for 3 years, I would supply, I first gave the police station a printer because I figured out that these guys are typing statements, writing statements on piece of paper, so I gave them a computer and a printer. Then I realized that they actually need bond paper. So I ended up supplying bond paper. My point is that if our police system is still using statements that you have to write on a piece of paper somewhere, and at best the investigating officer brings their own laptop to type a statement, the enforcement of the cybersecurity bill becomes very compromised. And secondly, if our police are still using Mbuzi phone, their ability to enforce the law becomes a little bit compromised. If the back end are supporting institutions such as registry office, if you look at Makombi building, this office and the like, are still very manual, you have a problem. So in our digital transformation consulting services, we always insist that you'd need the front end to be digital, which enables users to easily access the service. And secondly, you need the back end to be digital, otherwise then the whole process fails. And thirdly, you need the laws and the regulations to talk digital. So in this case, then the country started with the laws and regulation, which is a good starting point. But for the whole thing to work, you need the back end or back office where the processing takes place to be digital. And you need the front end, which comprises on one end law enforcement agents to be fairly digital and some users. Otherwise, then it becomes a very big problem. Imagine in court having the investigation officer who doesn't have the digital capability, and then you've got a cyber law, and then you've got. But look, I've used an example here. The cyber security law has got much more than what I've referred to. But it's a good development. But I wish some of these laws were developed after considering all the aspects or the implications thereof. For me, really, I think an economic model for Zim, yeah, for sure. In any part of the world, you would need some natural resource if you've got it. So for us, from the day the British South Africa company landed in Zim, they found a very flourishing agricultural economy. We always that way. So they were looking for minerals. They couldn't quite find as much as they wanted and changed the model. So, but there were minerals in Zim. So agriculture and mining remains a key component of that kitty. But what I would do is add innovation and digital on top of that, so that my model going forward is not just raw farming and raw mining with spade and hammers, but providing mining innovation services to the rest of the world, providing agriculture innovation service to the rest of the world, how the rest of the world can improve agricultural productivity. You probably would have heard that some people are saying already, if agricultural production or food production does not go up by 70%, this world will run out of food by 2050. And Africa is actually a net importer of food. So there is space for Zim to position themselves, not in terms of supplying raw food, but in terms of using our literacy rate and putting innovation, and then providing agriculture innovation services. If you look at countries like Israel, Taiwan, Singapore, they probably didn't quite rely too much on natural resources, but positioned themselves using services, using technology and innovation to create a robust economy. If you look at the big top 100 companies in the world from 100 years ago, there's been a shift from the top companies being in manufacturing steel, that shifted into now, as we speak 100 years later, into technology-oriented companies. This is what is dominating the rest of the world. So my proposed economic model would mix what we have on the ground with a big bias towards the future, which is digital and innovation, and I'll put on top. I would even change the way, let's say, ministries are set up. I don't quite think that having a minister of ICT on its own would give us maximum value. Would have a Ministry of Innovation for starters. Because what we have now to drive technology, if you look at it, you've got ICT, which is overseeing the sector, but the reports that we get are largely on number of SIM card users and cost of data and things like that. What you are definitely missing in that mix is what private sector and SMEs are doing in terms of technology and innovation. It's not reported anyway. When in fact, that is where the future is going, Facebook, the biggest best content business in the world, does not own a single journalist and employ a single journalist. Uber, the best transport business in the world, does not own a single car. So our approach to technology and innovation is such that we are missing any reports, tracking, and understanding of what's happening in the sector outside of telecommunications. And we probably still modeling our economy on the traditional classic approach, and that won't help us to leapfrog the rest of the world. The current cost model is proposed by regulators, not only in Zim, but in a few countries in SADC, is the running incremental cost, where they go to the existing telecommunication operators and they check how much does it cost them to provide a megabit of data or a minute of voice, and therefore from there try and see what would be a fair price to the consumer. The problem with that approach is that it assumes the underlying fundamental cost in the country, for example, or in the sector, are okay and right. Because if those fundamentals are not okay and right, you're going to start from a wrong base altogether. If you look at countries where there is no sufficient infrastructure sharing, if you look at Zim in particular, after 2008, when we went into the US dollar economy, our cost base for labor was skewed from 2008 to 2013. We didn't quite understand or appreciate the value of the US dollar. And therefore, when you do long-running incremental cost in such an environment, you're going to have very skewed cost. That won't quite help. And you would also have issues of the upstream internet bandwidth, how internet is being brought into the country, affecting the underlying cost. I think rather than running a cost analysis on an existing model, I would have gone back to the basics and re-looked at the business and operating models for telecommunications in Zim, and put the right policy framework to change things. For an example, bring other big Pan-African players like MTN and Vodafone to change the basics of telecommunications in Zim. I would set up a national infrastructure company to change the basics of how infrastructure is shared and the underlying cost of it. I would redo the regulatory environment completely. And change things. Even invite virtual mobile network operators. On average, countries have got 4.5 mobile operators. Just maybe call it 4 or 5. But in Zim we got 3, and they are all doing well within their own right. So I don't quite believe that the approach to just do a cost analysis on the basis of what is existing is the way to go. In other sectors where we're doing digital transformation, what we do is go back to the basics and unpack the operating model, unpack the business model. And invariably, you find that the problem is not quite strategy. It's not that. It's not the vision. It's how the business model is structured within that sector, which is wrong. I would do that. Then out of that process, look at how data, the price goes down. You just compare the price of data in Zambia, Malawi, Zim, and which are all landlocked countries, you see a massive difference. And when you track it back, it's the structure of the industry and the business models within the industry that affects it. Of course, the kind of skills and leadership we have in our sector, they've done very well. Given the constraints within which the country is operated. Otherwise, the industry wouldn't have gone very far. I think there are many published, highly researched KPIs that can be used to monitor progress towards a middle income economy. And probably I'm not a polished economist with sufficient knowledge to comment in that space, and my knowledge is probably very dangerous. But what I can perhaps comment is things that I see countries miss when they progress towards that. I think the first one is culture. When we work in companies, we always talk of organizational culture, but there's also a national culture. And no matter how good the strategy of an organization is, how good the vision and all those things, and even funding, if the culture is wrong, the organization won't go very far. But the same applies when you scale it up to a country. I think if the culture is not transformative, if the culture isn't quite aligned to production, if people are used to getting quick money, you're not going to go very far. So I would have a culture measurement index to see if we are really progressing. If I take my area as a case in point, 90% of the people in all the households around ours, rural area, have moved to Harare, and they are staying in these sprawling informal settlements in Harare East, Harare South, and the like. And then they spend the whole day doing not much, just hanging around trying to get a quick money in there. And where they came from, they left one or two people, and these are the few people that are now left to produce enough food to feed the whole country, because the culture is for that we need quick money and jobs. And that's quite good, because at the end of the day, the whole country is not producing. People are idling somewhere, waiting for government to do something in order for things to change. Similarly, if you look in many companies in Zim, I think there is some culture that is crept in that started perhaps 2008, which is not good. So a KPI around culture transformation is very critical to try and see if the economies are moving ahead. And linked with that is a culture in the economy that focuses on production and development and less on politics. I think we have grown into believing that politics is everything. Politics solves everything. Politics is the end all be all. And even within that political space, we are fixated with politics of individual, big men politics, and that we are not people that does robust debate and analysis on development, putting development ahead of politics. Somehow, if I want to start a business today, or if Chicken Inn opens a branch in Weza, they wouldn't hire somebody without a track record to run it. But at a national level, we believe that a person can be a minister, can be a leader of a party or anything, even if they've not run a spice shop in their own right. And just because we love them or we prefer them, therefore they can deliver. So we have gotten all mixed up in terms of culture. We need to put development ahead of politics. If there was a measure around that, I think would know that we are progressing a little bit more towards a middle-income economy by 2030. So there are certain things that are unique to Zim, which I would track and measure over and above that which the economists and financial people would put. Just to put things in context, I'm not a legal expert. I'm a digital and technology kind of guy, so that's the angle from which I understand things. But what I can see here is that of the many laws that have been put in place, most of them are fit into the natural way in which people do things. So criminal laws, we all grew up knowing that we don't have to steal. And many other laws are a natural progression of human development. The challenge with things like cyber laws and even financial laws are very technical and specific to certain applications. And therefore would require significant training in terms of the people that enforce the laws or the people that are affected for it to make sense. So your question is very valid from a sense that apart from civil servants, there are many other people that require to be trained. I remember in South Africa, a lot of corporates put a huge amount of money to train employees around POPI, which is one of the laws put here to regulate or manage information in corporates. So apart from government, private sector, NGOs and the like would have a big role to play, because this is where the criminal offenses of the development take place. Now, with regard to Official Secrets Acts, my limited knowledge about law is that there is no law which is absolute in its own right. And that is why there's a constitution sitting on top which must align all the thinking, because some of the laws may contradict what the expectations are from other parts of the law. That is as far as I can comment with regard to that. But suffice to say, perhaps the first area where the cyber law would need to be very advanced, because it's very kind of isolated and there's resources, is around corporates. I think they can put a bit of money to educate employees and staff and see how far we can go. We also have universities. We also have other areas. Before we go to rural areas, there are quite a few sectors where advancement could take place. But what I wish and aim for is that when these laws are enacted, apart from protecting the state, protecting people, protecting entities around criminal elements, these laws should also facilitate development. I think our continent in particular is hungry for development and opportunities. And therefore we need laws that enable and open opportunities for responsible and legal development. And there's a very big difference when you approach laws with the idea of stopping thieves and stopping criminals, with the idea of enabling responsible, lawful development. I sincerely hope that within this space, the excitement that people have around the cyber law, they can see the opportunities that have been made available for us to use it to develop our country. The number portability issue would need to be separated from pricing models used by different countries. And there are many ways services are paid for to the regulator by the network operators, depending on what the country wants to achieve. But number portability is simply saying, if I've got a number from operator X, I should be able to move across with that number to operator B. That's it. And even if there is a fee which will be charged for me to do that, I want that freedom to move that to move across with the number. In some countries, that has really helped to level the playing field. In other countries where number portability wasn't quite used successfully, you then find a lot of people with 3 or 4 mobile numbers or phones, just so that they keep their numbers with them. So this concept should have been tested in the market, and it takes some investment into some infrastructure that then does the switching of numbers, that this number now belongs to this operator, or when I call you, it just double checks where that number now is sitting, and that facility is nothing to do with the cost of the original number and the price paid to the regulator for the original number. If you look at South Africa, the original number still belongs to ICASA. They own the number. And how ICASA charges the operators for the number is up to them. But as a consumer, I just want the ability to move my number with me. It's not quite explained why Zim hasn't tried that. And perhaps it would have solved quite a few problems that we have. In other countries, there's also virtual mobile network operators where you are allowed to start your own telecoms company without owning the infrastructure. You can rent it from somebody else who has got the capacity and space to do. And then that then allows for operators to compete on the basis of services, quality, and innovation as opposed to infrastructure. That hasn't quite happened with us in Zim, and I guess perhaps the regulators would have some good reasons and justifications why that hasn't happened. But in countries or economies where that has been used, it has also changed the dynamics of the industry, perhaps to some extent reduced cost, to some extent improved competition. I think one of the things that is a country we could benefit a lot from is the appreciation that ICT is much more than just telecommunications. And that if technology is going to play a key role in our development, we need to look beyond telecommunications. So in this conversation, the private sector, big corporates come in very handy to interrogate what exactly they are doing as far as investment and advancement in technology is concerned. Government institutions, state-owned enterprises, and local authorities, to what extent are they digitizing their environment to create the bigger ecosystem required for the advancement of technology? Just to use very basic examples, to what extent is municipality of Chegutu digital? Do I go to the municipality of Kadoma to get a statement for my water and electricity and rates, or can I get it online? To what extent is an average corporate in Zim very manual? And how much of their investment are they making towards technology advancement? COVID has taught us that now you need to digitize leave applications, you need to digitize HR and many things like that, so that you create adequate economies of scale towards digital transformation of the entire economy. This is outside of telecommunications, which of course provides the basic infrastructure on which digital should run. But it's the SMEs, the local government authorities, the private sector, the other institutions as long as they remain in a very manual and archaic mode, as long as their culture is still not digital, we're not going to go very far in digitizing our economy. The business case for 5G and the overall justification is not necessarily based on consumers alone. So the argument that how many people can afford a 5G handset is not quite pressing at this point in time. Obviously, the expectation is that, with Moore's law, which says the cost of technology or processing power is dropping every 1.5 years, or put differently, the capacity of processing power is doubling every 18 months. One expects that to some extent the cost of devices would come down as we go somewhere into the future. In the short term, the understanding of 5G is that it really brings convergence from telecommunication services, broadcasting to industry, particularly industry. So one of the key drivers for 5G is Internet of Things. So you could have, if I take advanced economies, self-driving cars running off a 5G network. I could have an automated manufacturing plant for oil somewhere in Workington in Harare, connected on a 5G network. Is the realization of a true fourth industrial evolution running off a wireless network with high capacity and bandwidth, and therefore the availability and cost of handsets becomes a part of it, not a whole of it. So if you then deploy 5G with a business case driven by consumers buying handsets, I don't think it's going to be viable at all at this point in time. But if I deploy it with the idea that these broadcasters recently licensed, or many of these industries can now have good internet bandwidth, then yes, there's a solid story to tell. But to answer your question directly, for sure in the short medium term, if the cost of even 4G enabled handsets is still a little bit higher, in fact, people are just looking at internet enabled phones, and if in our case only 50% of our population can afford it, we're still a little bit long way to getting affordable 5G enabled handsets. But as I said, 5G, generally the business case is not on the basis of a handset driven business. You could also have it driven by routers, where at the end of it, you need a Wi-Fi enabled device. So I have 5G to the router, and from the router I can have Wi-Fi for the house. That is in kind of fixed or semi-fixed applications. If you then want a truly mobile application, you want to do a 5G call or usage in a truly mobile setup from Harare to Madondo, that's a different case altogether. The first step in risk mitigation in ICT is perhaps to accept that nowadays in the digital space, risk and failure are a key component of it. It's all about experimentation, failing fast, and learning very fast. And as a result, the kind of environment you need to set up is one that allows and accepts failure as part of the process. In fact, by nature, when you move from a very traditional ICT, huge capital investment perspective to a digital space, you are changing the culture into one where experimentation and failure are accepted. So how do you then mitigate risk? Firstly, creating a very agile environment and environment that allows quick engagement and quick disengagement with any partners. The second thing that you may want to consider in that environment is enabling ecosystems so that your value creation is driven by the ecosystem. Your investment and risk sharing is also underpinned by the ecosystem. So you don't take the full risk by yourself. You share with the ecosystem, and your approach becomes one of maximizing your share of the ecosystem value created. And this applies at a personal level, company level, or national level. The third element is obviously capacitation and skills development. I believe we are at a point where the convergence of ICT and traditional businesses is now there. So I would need to capacitate as much as possible, encourage our staff members or whoever is involved so that they can become digital or skilled up because these things are happening are very fast. From a national level, I think the development of our own platforms is very important. Just put things in perspective. The most successful platform in Africa is DSTV, used in many places. That's on a broadcasting perspective. Mobile money is also a good platform, although we have not, apart from Pesa, we have not had other big platforms. So we would need kind of to encourage African countries to develop pan-African platforms and global platforms. That way you are mitigating risk in the sense that you control the platform yourselves. Of course, one would say don't over-invest in technology because it's dying every other day, and more and newer things are emerging. At a national level is really putting a regulation and policy which encourages development much more. And if you look at the percentage of revenue or money spent on research and development in Africa or in ZIM is still very low. In fact, R&D in ZIM is still driven by government through universities. If you look at countries like South Africa, it's the other way around. Much more of it is driven by private sector, and then you've got universities. If you look at Zambia and Malawi, Zambia or perhaps Botswana, 50% of it is driven through universities and private sector. So risk mitigation is around how the investment into ICT R&D is made. Would need private sector and other entities to come in and drive it much more, so that it's not left to government only to drive it via universities. I think the Minister of ICT has got their own approach and strategies to communicate the policy which they are driving. I don't have enough information and authority to speak on their behalf. So I can only comment from what I would kind of perhaps expect or what I see in other countries is if the ICT is seen as a telecommunications um, kind of driven sector, which is what it is, but we can't see if we can't see beyond telecommunications, then that's where the problem starts, because there is a limit to which one could always articulate about just telecommunications. ICT is technology, ICT is information, ICT is development of industry. What are banks doing? What is insurance doing? What is manufacturing doing? What is local authorities, what are they doing as far as technology is concerned? And when you look at it that way, you see it becomes much more than just telecommunications. Without, of course, underplaying the fact that telecommunications provide the underlying backbone and foundation on which these things are built. But fourth industrial revolution is much more than that. In fact, it removes the original fixation around infrastructure and says what really matters is information. And I think that's kind of what we need to do in order to move a step forward. There's always big debates around the impact of digital and automation in terms of jobs. In some cases, the natural conversation is that digital transformation and automation is going to result in unemployment, because now you can use machines and systems to do the same. And that's true to an extent. But there's also a counter argument that what digital and automation in particular is doing is just replacing a type of skill with another. So rather than having a manual skill, I now need a skill that can do artificial intelligence. I now need a skill that can do process automation. And I now need a skill that can do things like blockchain and the like. So it becomes a question of a replacement of one skill type with another. Now, because many of our employees or industries, we get married to a profession and a skill, and you want to keep it and move that particular one and perhaps go to the grave with it. So when it becomes redundant, we say, okay, we are not, we are losing jobs because of digital. And of course, part of the problem is that if our education systems and universities are not quickly adapting their curriculum so that we start churning out the skills that are actually in demand, we then have the effect that when you deploy technologies, people lose jobs. In some cases where people were able to migrate their skills from very manual, traditional, or old into the new generation one, process automation and digital actually increase skills. Now, when you try and apply this into an environment like Zim, which is still very manual to a large extent, it sounds very utopian, really. Because then if I automate a factory in Masasa, for sure, jobs will be lost. But it's because digital, without growing the ecosystem around it, there is no place where these newer jobs and skills will be created. So if I import a piece of software from India or from China or US and put it and jobs are lost, I need somewhere where a corresponding factory or industry to create the software should be started. And this is where then the argument that these things miss it. So your point is right, that you would need the other ministries to say, okay, if jobs are lost here, how can we recreate newer jobs? I can tell you today that a big number of Zimbabwean software developers are no longer working in Zim, although they are staying in Zim. They are finding jobs to do software development for companies in Sweden, in South Africa, in India, and they do it remotely. And they are paid nicely. That's how things have changed. But general model is we need to do a factory. I mean, let's just give you an example. Because of our fixation in mining and agriculture, to get a return on agriculture, I need to grow crops, I need to wait for a year, I need to depend on rain, I need to depend on many other things. The same applies to a mine. I need to dig it up and then refine the gold and do all sorts of other things. And the cycle is very long. But if we were to focus on software-based industries, what you need is a bunch of clever guys. You can even pay them in RTGS, get somebody from overseas or local, wherever, to supervise, and suddenly we can create a software industry for mining and for agriculture. We can create any industry that we focus on, and we are no longer dependent on rain, so the whole issue of drought falls away. You don't need massive capital investment to start a software business, so the whole issue of foreign direct investment falls away. The whole issue of auction rates and exchange rates and looking for forex does not apply anymore, because you don't need to import raw materials to start a software business. You just need brains and a place for somebody to write their code. So that changes the dynamics completely in terms of job creation and unemployment, as we would see it happening. But it's a massive change that requires every other hand to be on deck to push if we're to go that route. Thank you very much for the time, and thank you for the opportunity to compare notes, share notes, and perhaps see how together we can progress and have a good afternoon and enjoy what's left of your Sunday. Thank you.